Hi, my name is Ken Davidian, and welcome to the second season of Organization Theory in Space, or OT in Space. In this season, I'm making a brief video for each of the 36 chapters of the Oxford Handbook of Organizational Change and Innovation, second edition, edited by Marshall Scott Poole and Andy Van de Ven. This video covers chapter 27 of the handbook, entitled Time and Temporality of Change Processes. In this chapter, we'll discuss the current definitions of episodic and continuous change and how those definitions depend on the conception of time, since time is a major independent variable in the definition of both terms. We'll talk about two different ontologies or views of change, episodic and event-based. We'll also talk about the differences and commonalities of those two ontologies and wrap up with a new definition of change on which attempts to integrate both in a way that situates episodic and continuous change as two dimensions of the same phenomenon. Let's get started. Because the organizational change is defined as a change over time in some characteristic or trait of an organization, the definition of change depends not only on the characteristics or traits of the organization, but also on our perception of time itself. In the case of episodic change, our perception of change is based on chronos, or Newtonian time, leading to a permanent and sequential before and after logic of time. On the other hand, continuous change assumes no before or after, but assumes only a flow of meanings to certain events that take on personal, relational, and shifting meanings over time. The same event can be overlooked at one point in time and recognized as a significant occurrence at some later time. The same event can be seen differently from the perspective of different individuals, or the event can take on different meanings when seen relationally with respect to other events. In this view, events don't happen, they become. The question of this chapter poses is whether or not both types of change can be combined ontologically as two dimensions of something they refer to as an imminent temporal trajectory. Aristotle wrote that without change, there would be no experience of time. In one sense, the type of change we perceive depends on the time span we choose to measure it. If we're trying to measure a change that takes place over a long period of time, but we use short time intervals for our data collection, we'll get very different results in comparison to what we would detect if we collected data over longer time intervals that are closer to the time span of the change we're trying to measure. In the episodic change view, time is considered to be fixed, uniform, and purely sequential. Change is the difference between states or events that occur at fixed points in time with fixed meaning as time moves forward. Events are both accomplished in a sequential fashion, fixed in both time and meaning. Even causality is implied by this sequence, where event A leads to event B, leads to event C, and so on. This leads to a sequence of events that characterize a fixed perception of change and causality. In the event-based view, change takes place as events are continually redefined over time based on individuals' perceptions and the changing relationships between events. Events are continuously redefined, as are their causes and effect. The chapter asserts that episodic and continuous change are actually complementary to one another instead of being ontological opposites. Episodic change ontologically assumes that organizations are stable systems that must be forced into change as led by managers in response to external shocks or triggers at the level of the environment. Continuous or emergence change has an ontological base of the fluidity and internal drivers of change through problem solving, improvisation, and the like. This change is emergent, self-organizing, and cumulative. These internal drivers are based on individual perceptions and takes place at the level of practice. The emergence view rejects the idea of trigger events as the cause of change. How these two views of episodic and continuous change are connected is under-theorized. In an attempt to bridge the gap between episodic and continuous change ontologies, the authors modify the definition of both types of change. The definition of episodic change is expanded to include the influences of past, present, and expected experience. The meaning of the change can evolve over time to fit the current situation. This adds the internal or imminent component to the definition of episodic change from the continuous change ontology. In this way, episodic change is defined as significant breaks as experienced or anticipated by individuals through time, thereby extending the definition of continuous change. The continuous change process emphasizes the act of performing change continuously, which can be thought of as a proxy of an individual's present. This is what the authors refer to as the imminent temporal trajectory. The episodic events are perceived as breaks from an individual's perspective, but which are perceived as continuous from higher levels of perspectives. Well, that's it for this chapter. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. If you want to make sure you don't miss any future videos in this season of Organization Theory in Space, please consider hitting the subscribe button or the notification bell. Thanks! OT in Space was produced by IRL, which stands for Impossible Research LLC. IRL conducts process research on the topics of innovation and industry emergence within the space sector context. IRL also offers services of organization theory consulting, research consulting, and STEAM outreach. This video is intended for educational purposes only.